911, where is your emergency?
In 2009, we had a very unusual harvest year. We had a lot of corn that went into storage that was not properly dried, nor was it matured. And so some of that corn began to decompose or actually go out of condition in the bins. And it was our understanding or prediction back early in the fall that we were going to see a lot more grain bin entrapments because there's a direct correlation between out of condition grain and an increased number of entrapments and suffocation.
2010 brought a record number of grain bin accidents and fatalities since Purdue University began collecting data in 1977. From January through October, at least 46 entrapments occurred, and of those 46, 25 have been fatal. Unfortunately, that does not mean there have not been other entrapments. Experts estimate the total number of cases could be 20 to 30% higher nationwide from unreported incidents, many involving teenagers.
On Wednesday, July 28th, my nephew, Alex, went to his second day on a job working in a grain bin. And it was hot, it was sunny, and he never came home. I got called in the evening by my mom, and she was in hysterics. I think that Annette had called her sometime in the afternoon. I think she waited to call because I think there was the hope that they would get Alex out. They were inside the bin, and the youngest boy fell. Wyatt, he was 14, fell into the grain. And from what Will said, Will was a 20-year-old, they were trying to hang on to him. And somehow Alex then fell and Will fell. And the way Alex fell, his hands were trapped. The way Will fell, his hands were free. Will was trying to keep the corn out of Alex's face. And of course, the corn would keep caving in. He knew that he wasn't going to make it out of there alive. He was praying and of course telling Will, you know, tell everybody I love him. Tell my, you know, he's got 6 little brothers and sisters. He was the oldest. My family respects Will so much for being brave enough and strong enough to be able to tell us this. And that he couldn't keep Alex alive. He couldn't keep the corn out of his face.
Tragedies such as this can greatly affect a farm family's ability to even continue to farm on the same ground.
My experience has been, as I've watched some of these families go through these incidents, some of them lose the farm. Some of them end up being so uncomfortable with the grain handling structure that they actually will bulldoze down the bins where this person had died. Because they can't run away from this. Oftentimes it's a brother, a son, multi-generation, where they have to go back to work the next day to empty that grain.
But families are not the only ones grain bin fatalities affect. Having close ties with neighbors is an important part of rural America that can also make such tragedies difficult for first responders.
You're going to the local neighbor, and your local neighbor is the responder coming out there to help you. This is that person that you sit on the school board with and you go to basketball games and your kids grew up together. There is a real tight bond there, and even it plays a hard role even on the rescuers and the responders coming out, knowing that they're coming to somebody they know.
I think that a tragedy, a grain bin tragedy, maybe involving a fatality, maybe involving loss of limb or whatever, it affects the whole rural community. Everyone's really close knit, and they really care for one another. And whether it happens in your immediate community or in a county or a municipality several counties away, it still seems like it's a part of you. And you hear some of these things and you just can't imagine what these people are going through.
Cases such as Alex's are unfortunately not as uncommon as they should be, and statistics show a trend for the younger as well as older generations of farmers finding themselves in entrapped situations the most.
We have found a national trend that 13 to 17-year-olds have a higher rate of accidents and entrapments, or farmers over the age of 55 and up. Basically, I believe there's a part that says that I'm invincible and it's not going to catch me. And I think the farmers that have been doing it all their lives, there's a level of complacency that gets dangerous. I've been in bins all my life, it can't happen to me.
Today, firefighters across the country, especially in rural areas with a high volume of grain storage, are trained with the most up-to-date techniques and innovative tools to help their rescue efforts be as successful as possible. One technique frequently used today is strategically cutting a panel to allow grain to flow.
What you see here is an evolution that we teach responders that if they don't have the training or the ability to make entry into a bin, one evolution they can do until rescuers get there is to cut the bin to drain the grain out. Simultaneous cuts on opposite sides of the bin at the same time. It's all a part of our training. Our goal is to cut the bin, to empty the bin. Some of the concerns from farmers are that you're going to ruin the bin. What we do is we never cross the seam, so it's only one panel. And once they make the cut, they can actually control the flow of the grain should one side start flowing faster than the other. That way, there is concern of being able to topple a bin if it's unloading unevenly.
A new rescue tool developed only 4 years ago is another way to rescue a victim trapped in grain.
The tube concept really came about as we saw first responders using a variety of items to put around people in the event of an entrapment. That included 55-gallon drums, garbage cans, pieces of plywood, and we thought it would be good to try to come up with a standard approach and some standard piece of equipment that could be used. It's really quite simple. It's 4 sheets of plastic that are interlocked together that have handholds in each of those sheets. And as the victim may be in a case where he's partially buried, he might only have his head above the surface of the grain, we assemble the plastic sheets around the victim and then push them into the grain. There's actually a grain driver that we use, or a slide hammer, that drives the sheets into the plastic and allows you to take that tube all the way down around the base of that victim. And then use a vacuum cleaner. We're using a portable vacuum cleaner, or you can use a shop vac. Suck the grain out from around the victim, and then you suddenly freed him up, and then he can be lifted up out of that area. We now know there's been about 4 incidents where these tubes have been used successfully to rescue someone that's been deeply buried in grain.
Dave also emphasized the importance of properly training firefighters and first responders to deal with situations such as grain bin rescue. But he also mentioned that even after the countless hours of training, firefighters aren't immune to tragedy, even on their own farms.
We actually lost a firefighter in a grain bin in southern Illinois a couple years ago. He farmed with his dad and his uncle. And the bad part of that one was the fact that he was the daytime command officer, and they had to rescue him, and he died.
Startling statistics also show that while other farm accidents are decreasing, grain bin engulfments are not. Professor Field explains his findings and what he feels are the strongest reasons behind the increased number of grain bin deaths.
We think there's a number of reasons for that, including more on-farm storage. Farmers are hanging on to the grain longer. They're also using larger volume equipment to unload these structures, so it comes out quicker. Therefore, it gives the sense of almost turning it into a fluid, so that when they get into it, it's drawn into the center well so quickly that they can't get out. But there's a number of variables that are contributing to this increased number of cases.
One of the most common ways to become entrapped in grain is climbing inside when there's flowing grain.
The typical human body is about 2 bushels. We got units that are emptying bins at 1,200, 1,500, 2,000 bushels an hour, so it just takes a matter of seconds for the human body, the volume of the human body, to be drawn into a grain flow and be completely engulfed.
The second most common cause of entrapment is farmers trying to dislodge grain that is hung up or crusted in a bin.
I've seen the inside of bins where I know there's got to be 1,000 pounds of grain stuck to the side of those walls. And if a farmer comes up from underneath on those and tries to knock that material down, he can either be covered by the grain as it falls off the wall and begins to flow down on him, or these large chunks can come down and cause traumatic injury just because of the weight of them, and cause either head injuries or broken bones because of the chunks that fall on them.
While great strides have been made on rescue training, the number one way to keep yourself safe is by prevention. Most importantly, try to stay out of the bin if at all possible. But if you must enter a bin, do not enter alone, or make sure someone outside of the bin knows you entered. Also make sure to lock out unloading equipment, such as augers, before you enter to ensure they are not turned on by mistake. Finally, make sure you secure a lifeline, a harness, rope, or ladder to the proper area. Above all, do not shortcut your safety. You only have to be in grain up to your knees to be officially entrapped. It takes 325 pounds of pressure over and above the victim's body weight to extract them at this point. Once you're at chest level, the compression on your lungs is so great you will likely suffocate even if your head remains free and clear. But if you find yourself becoming entrapped, here is one way to make breathing easier until help arrives.
If the victim feels themselves going in, one thing they can do is cross their arms like this. It gives them the ability, hopefully the ability against all that pressure, to expand their lungs to breathe.
We understand that farmers are busy, but the next time you are about to enter a grain bin, stop and think twice. Decide if it is completely necessary, and if so, make sure to take all of the proper precautions to keep yourself from becoming a statistic. If not just for you, think about your farm, your family, and your community.
Speed is of the essence during harvest, but you need to think of this 5-minute shortcut that I'm doing. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to take the risk if it costs me my life?